Mike McCool here. I'm in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is several gentlemen from Randolph-Macon Academy. We have Geoff Peterson and Connor Gamma. They have some really unique stories to tell us about some of the flight programs and the accomplishment that this young man has made. Geoff, why don't you go ahead and start off and give us a little background about the flight program at RMA, and then we'll talk about all the great things that Connor's done.
Sure, Mike. Thank you so much for having us come in today. It's a real pleasure to be here with the Royal Examiner. The RMA flight program started in 1985 with a couple of airplanes and a vision, a dream, of being able to teach young men and women how to fly airplanes. Since 1985, we have graduated a number of young men and women that have gone on to four-year universities and other academies, such as the University of North Dakota, Purdue, Air Force Academy, Embry-Riddle, and even here locally at Liberty University. But Connor is my first student that I have graduated through the flight program. Although I have been teaching at Randolph-Macon for the last 5 years part-time, it's just been during the summer school flight camp program. Mm-hmm. But the school approached me at the beginning of the school year and said, would you be interested in coming on full-time? We have a need to add another instructor, and would you be interested? And because I live here in Front Royal, I like the community, and I'm getting to a point where I'm not looking to retire, but the idea of living less than a mile away from the campus...
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it works out well. And the speed of life here as compared to Northern Virginia is so much more appealing. So I said yes. We came to an agreement and started teaching young men and women how to fly airplanes. As I say, Connor is my first graduate, and this is a tremendous accomplishment. Private pilot certification is a tremendous accomplishment. It's something that's difficult for adults. I mean, if you go into a room where there's a group of people and somebody mentions, I'm a pilot, heads turn.
Right.
So it's a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, they're not going to be meteorologists, but they're going to know about weather. They're not going to be aerodynamic engineers, but they're going to understand the physics of why the airplane flies. They're not going to be electrical engineers, but they're going to understand how the electrical system on the aircraft works. So it's not that learning how to fly, that any one thing is that difficult. It's that the whole scope and then the detail within that scope of knowledge is so great that it can be a little overwhelming, especially on day one of flight training.
Sure. I remember that.
I believe you said you were a student pilot a year or two ago.
I have 9 hours on my flight record, so and 70 years old, I didn't get a whole lot of hours. Yeah. So I remember the very first day.
And it's funny you should mention that, because we all, as pilots, and I don't care whether you have 200 hours or 2,000 hours or 20,000 hours, we all remember back to our very first day. There's two things that I think pilots do remember with very severe clarity, is the very first flight and then your solo flight. And I can remember both of those days. I'm sure you can also, Connor.
I can.
My very first day, I remember it was a flight in 1978. I was just barely out of high school and decided this is something I've always wanted to do. And I remember thinking, as we were taking off out of Manassas, and I was looking down at the top of the building that I'd just been sitting in with my instructor, I thought, what the devil am I doing in this airplane? I have
Can I get out?
You know, can we just go back, because I'm thinking I'm not liking this very much. I have a fear of heights. Amazingly, a lot of pilots have acrophobia.
Yeah.
And which is of course all
Sure.
up here. Mm-hmm. And if I'm in a cockpit of an aircraft, small aircraft, and I look outside and I look down, I'm perfectly fine.
Doesn't bother you at all, does
You
it?
take the door of the airplane off, I can't do that. It's all mental. But I remember my very first flight, and it was, what am I doing in this airplane?
Yeah.
Solo flight, pretty much the same thing. Am I really getting ready to go out there and fly this airplane without the instructor in the cockpit to fix my mistakes?
Sure.
So the accomplishment of actually going through the FAA training and testing procedure, it's very comprehensive. There are computerized tests. There are written knowledge tests. There are all. It's just from start to finish. It's test after test after test. A lot of milestones. But the certification check ride that Connor just went through a week ago with a very critical but fair examiner, it's a lot of pressure. It's 3 years, in his case, almost 4 years.
Almost 4.
Of training that it all now gets distilled down to the next 2 hours in the oral examination and another couple of hours going out into the airplane and demonstrating to the examiner that you can actually, walk the walk and act as pilot in command.
Take off and get back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, take off and land.
And land.
And you kind of jokingly tell the students that, look, takeoffs and landings, if you divide one by the other, it should not leave a remainder of anything. They should all come out, and they all equal out.
That's where algebra came in. See, you knew there was some algebra.
Yeah.
I told him it was going to be a little bit of math.
I remember when they said we're going to the moon and back safely.
And back.
And
See,
back.
that's a little key thing there.
So, Connor, how many hours do you have of flying then in these 4 years?
So currently I'm totaling up to 102 hours in air. So yeah, a little more than I should. but-
I can remember something about 40 hours was the requirement to get a license back a long time ago. So
And it still is.
Is it?
It still is.
Okay.
And it still is. It takes a minimum of 40 hours of total time to be eligible.
Right.
Okay, let's get this clear. The check ride itself is a performance-based check ride, and whether you have 40 hours or 400 hours, you still have to be able to demonstrate competency to the FAA standards. But 40 hours is still the minimum eligibility time, and of that 40 hours, 20 of it has to be dual instruction with a certified flight instructor such as myself, and then 10 hours of solo practice time. Of course, that immediately brings up the question, well, 20 and 10 don't add up to 40. Those are just minimum eligibilities.
Right.
So you usually wind up filling in with more solo time or more dual instruction time. Nobody ever makes it in the 40 hours minimum time.
Right,
the national average is somewhere around 65, 70 hours. So Connor's really not that heavy as far as hours are concerned. He's pretty much average for a young man of his age, but he demonstrated incredibly good competency. The examiner, gentleman's name is Mark Loudermilk, and he's been a designated examiner for 29 years, flew for Eastern Airlines, and now currently is a corporate pilot that flies a variety of different aircraft for different customers. But he's been doing this for 29 years, and he came back in after the check ride, of course after we joke around a little bit, and he says,
Sure.
buddy, you got a lot of work here to do. And I looked at him and I says, yeah, right. Tell me how it really went. He said, it's very, very well prepared applicant. Very well prepared applicant. He said, the young man did great. I sat in on the oral questioning, and on a scale of 1 to 100, I said I'd give him an 85 or 90%, which is about where you hope for. There is no perfection.
Sure.
Nobody flies a perfect check ride. I can't count the number of check rides I've flown all the way up through the current certification that I hold of airline transport pilot, flight instructor, aircraft maintenance technician, aircraft inspector. All of these require practical tests. But I think the most difficult one to do is private pilot, the one that he just got finished doing, because you have no idea what's going to be expected of you. You've never done this before.
Right.
There's no previous history that you have of what to compare this to. Right. So for somebody like me that goes on my 25th or 30th check ride, I've been through this before. Right. I know exactly what's expected of me. But a young man like Connor, or for you, if you decide you want to finish up that private pilot certification there, Mike.
I'm going to get Connor here to teach me.
But the most difficult one is the private pilot check ride, because it's totally new. The pressure, when you realize that this 3.5, 4 years of the time that I have spent training and getting ready now all gets distilled down into the next 2 hours of oral, 2 hours of flight. There's a tremendous amount of external pressure that's being applied to you. And we talk about that in flight training.
Right, right.
We talk about external pressures.
Right.
And this is their first real opportunity to see what external pressure really means. But you realize all of this effort comes down to how well do I do over the next 4 hours. Right. And as I say, Connor knocked it out of the ballpark. I'm very proud of this young man. It's something that adults have a hard time doing. And Connor did an excellent job.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, Connor, he's built you up.
A little bit.
So let's talk about how did you feel about this, kind of in the beginning as time went on, and then as you really approached this testing, what went through your mind?
So, like from the start?
Well, did you really want to be a pilot?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
so this is something that you went to RMA to
Yeah.
get to their flight program.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I transferred to RMA mid-semester my freshman year. I just wasn't really successful in my old institution, and I really wanted to fly. That had been a dream. I'd been nagging my parents, "Can I please do flight, outside of my school?" And they're like, "No, you're doing sports. It's too much." But we had looked into this for high school, and they said, if you still want to fly mid-semester, you can transfer and you can go, and then you can fly during your school day, and it
Right.
Makes sense. And so that's what I did, and I knew from the age of 7 when I was flying little RC gliders in my backyard that's really what I wanted to do, and I just loved it. And so from then on, it just took off. I got to RMA within the first 2 weeks of getting to RMA. I was already up in the air flying, and I still
You were
remember that day. Yeah, I was definitely
And when you
happy.
get the bug,
Yeah.
it kind of like,
Yeah, I think there's been no more than a 3-week time frame when I'm at school where I haven't flown. I try to fly once a week for about an hour and a half to 2 hours.
and now you can solo, but you
Yeah.
could solo before. You were solo training before.
Yeah. So now I can take passengers up, and I'm on my own, so to speak. I can make my own decisions now. I'm competent to do so, and I
So they
Only
give you a
one in
license
command.
with your picture on it and everything.
no, it doesn't have your picture on it, but they do give me a little license card and everything.
Yeah, you're
So-
proudly going to show. That's
Yeah.
something that you're going to have, like you say, your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
That you can. This is a benefit and an experience that just not everybody achieves.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Eagle Scout of flying. You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
you look like an Eagle Scout too. I
I try. The Academy's whipped me into shape a little bit.
they have. I told you my children went there, and it makes a big difference of their whole attitude through life.
Oh yeah.
So, what's your plans? You're going to graduate this year from RMA. What's your plans?
So my plans are to go to Old Dominion University and study business management while I'm there, and then also take the ROTC program there, Air Force ROTC, and then hopefully go into the Air Force as an officer, and then try to fly there too.
Well, that's good. That's good. As long as your eyes hold up.
Oh, yeah.
Till you
Hopefully.
once you get in, that's okay. You can wear glasses. It's always amazing that you can't get in if you wear them. So,
Yeah,
so just protect your eyes.
protect
right?
the eyes. I've been worried about that for a while, but
Right?
yeah, I
There's
think
a
I'll be
lot of
fine.
things. There's a lot of. I tell people to go into the military. Where else are you going to let an 18-year-old kid work on a $10 billion airplane?
Yeah.
Or fly? Because if you're a civilian, you're going to push the broom for a lot of years before you get around the big dollar stuff. And in the military, 18-year-old, 20-year-old kids are young men. We're out there working on stuff and having opportunities that you just don't get any place but in the military. So I think it's a great it's gives you a lot of opportunity, and I tell people all the time, volunteer for everything.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
And people say, don't volunteer for nothing. Yeah, you'll get a few crummy things out of it, but once you start volunteering with the right attitude, not a kisser, but it's amazing. There's a book in the Air Force that's at least 6 inches thick, and it's all about special assignments. I was in the Air Force 11 years, and I only worked in my career field 1 year. I told you when I
Really?
went to Greenland.
Right.
The other 10 years, I worked in special assignments, and it's just amazing. It's so many things I've done in just an 11-year period that I never would have been able to do in the civilian world. So that's what I tell people: volunteer for everything. Take those opportunities, because it'll change your life. It'll change your life. It already has at RMA.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great.
Once a pilot, always a pilot.
Once a pilot, always. But another thing I wanted to do was fly an airplane, but I also want to be able to sit down and play the piano. I can't do either one. So, the one thing that I tell you, what I told you some of my adventures in flying in my short 9 hours, but the hardest thing for me was holding the microphone on the radio and trying to fly the airplane and talk to the tower.
Yeah.
It just seemed like it was so awkward. Now they got little headphone microphones and everything, but you had to have this thing in your hand, and you don't know what. And I always flew the airplane like this because on a Cessna you couldn't see.
Yeah.
And for me, just flying down, I know there was nothing to run into, but maybe there was. But I wanted to see where I was going, and it was always pull the nose up, pull the nose up. You tell them that all the time.
The nose gets too low.
It
Yeah.
gets too low. And it was like, I couldn't see where I'm going. I'm flying down. I do remember that. Like I say, you remember these things.
Oh, yeah.
And that was in 1970 I did that. So I can still remember those adventures. And you'll remember this. He'll remember this interview, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure he will.
And you send this link to your grandma and
Oh, yeah, I'll send it to my family.
and say, "Oh, look at me! I'm on the Royal Examiner."
We have some really exciting times now at RMA. Like I say, the program started in 1985, and it really just started out to give a high school student an opportunity to see if this is something that they would enjoy doing, if this is something that they may want to include into their life. It was more of an exposure to aviation. However, the way the industry is now, and I don't think I've ever seen the industry more devoid of new pilots than it is right now.
Right, I know.
Over the next 10 years, just due to attrition, the commercial airline industry is going to lose something like 30% of their line pilots. 30%. The industry has not done a good job of keeping the training Ferris wheel filled.
Right.
So,
Well, I do know that they've changed the age because of this shortage. They've extended the years a few years to let them fly a little longer.
well, it went from 60 to 65,
Right.
and they're probably going to bump that up in the next year or two to
Just
67.
'cause they run out.
We're running out of pilots. So Dean Hegedus, our Dean of Academics at Randolph-Macon, decided that we were going to institute what's called a pre-professional pathway. And aviation is the first pre-professional pathway that we have at Randolph-Macon Academy. And by that I mean we're going to concentrate on training private pilots and having them ready to hit the ground running when they get to Liberty, when they get to Embry-Riddle, when they get to UND or Purdue or one of the four-year schools where they will continue on. But the industry is so void of pilots right now that the air carriers are taking people right out of high school and offering to train them. Mm-hmm. So when you consider that some people are getting out of college with $100,000+ of student debt to try to find a career, and a lot of them can't find a career, and they're living at home with their parents because they can't translate that degree into a paying job. It's not like it was 10, 15 years ago where maybe you earned $18,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year as an entry-level pilot. Entry-level pilots are getting paid 3 times that now. And the industry will train you to bring you up to the hourly requirement to be able to hold an airline transport pilot certificate. It's a 1,500-hour minimum. So the industry will now train you through commercial pilot, instrument rating, flight instructor certification. The industry will train you to get your flight instructor certificate so you can continue to go on and train pilots for their training operations to bring you up to the minimum number of hours to put you into the cockpit. So you wind up with an investment of, say, $10,000, $12,000 for a private pilot certificate, and now the industry trains you the rest of the way, then puts you into the right front seat of a regional air carrier making $75,000 a year.
Right.
It's a tremendous
working
opportunity.
20 hours a month,
Eh,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
absolutely.
It's really
They
low.
have limits on the amount of hours. You think about airline pilots as being what you see in the commercial world, but that's really probably the smallest number of pilots. They're used in all sorts of other aircraft, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. There are career
the-
paths through the corporate world. There are career paths through the commercial airline industry. There are career paths through the military. A lot of the airlines were getting their pilots from the airline industry, and now the military is saying, wait a moment, we're not going to spend $1 million in training on this individual just to let them take the training and go out and work in the airline
Right.
industry. We're going to pay you a comparable amount of money and a re-sign-on bonus. But as I say, the airlines are paying $10,000, $15,000 as a sign-on bonus, and then a captain, after say 10 years of flying, a captain is making over $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
that's a far cry from getting a degree, say, in political science. Not that there's anything wrong with a
Right,
political science
exactly.
degree, but getting a degree in political science, trying to figure out where am I going to get a job that doesn't include, would you like a hot apple pie with your order? Where can you get a job making this type of money and have the industry train you for it at the same time? So what we've done at Randolph-Macon is we've instituted this pre-professional pathways program. We're writing up curriculum so to specifically train pilots so they can hit the ground running first year at a 4-year institution.
Well,
It's very exciting
And it's
times.
better to find out whether you have the knack for it or the mental awareness to continue on at a much younger age than later on. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're kind of like, what would the word would be to kind of like, sort out the people that want to move on
Oh, yeah.
to it and get the serious people. Everybody wants to do it. Not everybody can do it. Like you said, they have a fear. I always say, like you said, is walk that 2x4 while it's laying on the ground is one thing. Move it 3 feet in the air, and just 3 feet. And
External
people
pressure goes up.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
pressure goes up. So people, have a knack for it. I remember those pictures they show of the steel workers, like on the Empire State Building back before OSHA.
Yeah.
They're walking along up on the
No belts, no just
belt,
walking.
Well, they didn't have a fear, and you're right. Pilots the same way. What did you learn about airplanes when they say the fly, and you learn about lift and everything, and then they fly the airplane upside down? How does that work?
Works the same way as it does right side up.
Yeah.
What happens to the lift? You're thinking what's going to push you down? No, that doesn't work that way, does it?
No,
Okay.
it just
Well, I guess that
countered.
theory is.
Yeah.
It's so much I know about flying. Anyway, well, I really appreciate you guys coming in. It sounds like it is a great program at RMA. How many other students at RMA like Connor
There
in the
has
path?
There have been a number of students that exhibited a little bit of interest, that once they have gotten involved, there's a real excitement over there now because of this pre-professional pathway
Right.
identification that our dean put into place. There's been a lot of excitement. As I say, the school approached me because I've been flying for 40 years. I've been instructing for 30 years, and they approached me and said, you have a lot of industry experience. Bring your industry experience. Bring your experience in training pilots. We'd like to have you as part of the program. And as I say, the support that I've gotten from our commandant, Mike Starling, from the support that we've received from the president of the school, General Dave Wesley, to Dean Hagedis, just a tremendous amount of support. It's a nice place to be.
Well, I appreciate that. So you have a little competition. You got still time to get a few more hours before the
Oh, yeah.
school ends.
I got a couple more rings I'm trying to get out.
Yeah.
It's a complex endorsement and maybe even instrument if I got time. It's gonna be a lot of work, but we'll try
see
it.
what happens,
We'll see what
John.
happens.
I
Yeah.
can remember a friend of mine was a pilot, old school, start with the stick, He was a little older, but he would fly. That was back before GPS on the phones and everything, and he only flew visual. And I can remember him getting out, stopping at the gas station and getting the map, and that's how he just followed the highways wherever he wanted to go.
We still teach them that.
Oh yeah.
Because what happens if the GPS shuts down? We say that all of those magic boxes that we have in the aircraft, people ask me, well, what makes that work? Well, it's magic smoke.
right.
Magic smoke makes all of the avionics work. And if you don't believe that, watch what happens when the magic smoke comes out of the box.
That's right.
The box quits working. So it's magic smoke. That's magic smoke that you see coming out of that box
Kind
if
of like
something goes wrong.
You only want the pilot there, so when all that doesn't work,
And that's why we get paid the money we get paid to sit on the left front seat.
when you said that, I was thinking of my heart surgeon. I said, "Well, how do you get all those things tied up really good?" He said, "That's why we make the big bucks."
Yeah.
Well, that's the only difference between heart surgeon and butcher is you like to use the patient after the job is done. It's the only real difference.
And pilots not, but you want to get off, but we want to get down as well
Yeah.
too. I think it's pilots are probably underappreciated. I know that every time I've got 3.5 million miles flown in my career. It says on my little card from American Airlines.
All in 9 hours.
All in 9 hours.
Okay.
But I do, every time I get off the airplane, I make an effort to thank the pilots and let them know I appreciate their hard work. And I make an effort to do that because, without them, wouldn't have had them 3.5 million
Yeah.
miles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what I'm really surprised about is I'm surprised, and we will probably see this happen. We've identified it at Randolph-Macon Academy. I'm really surprised that more high schools are not investigating this also as a career path. So Warren County, Skyline,
That's right.
may want to consider this because as a career path, there's a lot harder ways to earn less money.
Yeah,
than,
and that's a
driving an
movement
airplane
right
around.
now is the things you can do without without a 8-year college degree that takes you nowhere.
And the biggest, I think the biggest area of general aviation expansion right now is the remote unmanned aircraft. Everybody calls them drones. Technically, they're remote unmanned aircraft systems.
Right.
But the amount of explosion in the activity of remote unmanned aircraft. I have been an FAA knowledge test provider. I do FAA computerized knowledge tests for the general public. And I've done that since 1995. So generally, we're accustomed to seeing private pilot applicants coming in, a little few instrument ratings, commercial pilots. But when the FAA put Part 107 into effect about 4 years ago, the explosion of people coming through my testing doors in order to be able to take this airman knowledge test to get this commercial remote pilot, this commercial drone certification, it just exploded. We had a line waiting at the door to come in and do these 107 tests. So the remote pilot thing is also a very big and expanding program, and as such, we have the school has hired on Mr. Brian Kelly, who has a tremendous resume with the utilization of drones.
Yeah, you'd
So
be
we're
working for
addressing-
Amazon delivering
Oh, yeah.
packages.
But we're approaching both sides
Sure.
of what we see as a tremendous need of the industry, and of course that's our job, is to try to train young men and women to go out, be in the world, and be able to earn a living. And when we identified these two areas, that's
great.
That's where we put this into the flight program at RMA, both unmanned aircraft and manned aircraft, because of the huge need that that the industry has right now.
Right. Well, I've asked Geoff to send me some footage of Connor flying the airplane, and hopefully we'll get that, and we'll tag that on at the end here.
Sure.
And we'll see you. It will be Connor flying, and did you
Oh,
say?
yeah.
It'll
So-
be Connor flying.
And we'll see how well he really does. If he scares us to death with that.
Well, Mr. Kelly, Brian Kelly, who is our director of drone operations at RMA, I sent Brian out with Connor to go out and get some footage. And it was kind of interesting because Brian said to me, he said, well, when's your schedule available so we can go out and do this? I said, no, Brian, Connor's going to take you out by himself. And I could see the look on his face you mean you're not going to be in the airplane? No, Connor's certificated
That
as a pilot.
17-year-old kid's going to be flying me around.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
I
he
get a
said
lot
when
of
he,
looks.
when he came back for lunch. He sat down. He said, everything went great. Connor flew the airplane well. I was very comfortable. He said, but then I got thinking as we were on final to land. He said, I'm in this airplane with a 17-year-old kid. A 17-year-old kid.
And he's thinking, my 17-year-old kid, I wouldn't trust like me.
A 17-year-old kid with a private pilot certificate that's gone through a tremendous amount of training and a very rigorous testing process.
Well, it's an accomplishment, and I think it's great, and I really appreciate you coming in, Connor and Geoff, and telling us about
Thank you, Mike.
these things
Thank
here.
you.
And again, of course, RMA always does a great job with young men and women and giving them readiness to go forth in life. And
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.